Hi everyone, my name is Anne. I'm from Mindful Family and Wealth, where we help moms and women turn their income into legacy and build financial peace while raising financially aware kids without sacrificing what really matters to them. And today I'm super excited to be joined with me by a wealth lawyer, and his name is Peter. And we'll be discussing how we can help working family in building wealth wisely, protect their legacy, and raise financially confident kids, and using their practical and everyday, like with their practical everyday decision. And as I was telling you, Peter, the women in my community are mostly working hard women who are really intentional about their finances,
Yeah.
but sometimes they have challenges in knowing what is their best way to build their wealth. And also they have the will, but there's too much information on what is best for them
Yeah.
and what line they should take in building their wealth. And today I want us to uncover that so that they can start making wise decision and taking action in building their wealth.
Awesome.
So before we just jump into the discussion, I'd like you to introduce yourself, tell us who you are and your background, a bit of your background.
So I'm Peter. I'm originally from Zimbabwe. So I was born there, and then when I was about 8 years old, we moved to New Zealand, and that's where I did all my school. And then after university in 2020, that's when I moved to Australia because I graduated during COVID, and so there wasn't really many jobs around in New Zealand at the time. So that's when I moved over to start looking for work. So when I got here, I started off at Deloitte in tax for a little bit, and then I moved to practicing law. And in that time, I've covered things like banking and finance. And then I spent some time working for a wealthy family as a part of the legal team. So that's where I really got to get interested in the wealth management side of things and seeing what conversations does the family have, what structures they put in place, how are they doing their things. And then so when I was thinking about opening the business, that's when I thought it'd be one area I'd really want to take into the business because I find it's conversations that are important for us to also have in our community as well. And so we opened the business last year in June. So it's been just over 1 year with myself and my business partner.
Mhm. And I'd just like you to speak more about the wealth building in the families that you're working with. I'd like us to get
Yeah.
into that at first. Yeah.
Yeah, because you realize it's when it comes to wealth management, it's not only about working and making money. It's also about how do you keep more of it. So that covers the areas such as tax, right? Then it's like how do you actually structure it to pass it on to future generations? That's where you have your succession planning, estate planning, that kind of thing. So it's what I found with a lot of people are very good at the skill of making money, but it's also about how do you actually keep it, grow it, manage it, preserve it, pass it on. That really leads to generational wealth and contributes to legacy. Actually. Yeah.
In my mastermind, I teach from a place of where women try to work from their mindset,
Yeah.
in that they really understand what are the conversation, what are the beliefs that they have been believing about money.
Yeah.
And I want us to touch on that basis in terms of what is a mindset in the wealthy family. What do they believe in that allows them to build that wealth?
I think one thing I've seen is looking at things holistically as a family. So what I've seen with wealthy families is they structure their things in a way where they know that you're not just dealing with the individual, you're also dealing with the family wealth as a group. So an example of this is one conversation I have with clients and potential clients is about if you are wanting to, let's say, give your child money to buy a house and they've got a partner, what wealthy families often do is they try to figure out, okay, well, if our child has a divorce, how do we protect against that risk? Because they realize that significant life events don't just affect the individual, they affect the family wealth. So what sometimes they'll do is, for example, if they're giving their, say my parents are giving me money to buy a house and I've got a spouse, they'll give it to me under a loan agreement, for example, right? So that if our relationship ends and something happens, then we at least know that, we can pay the loan back from my parents before we split assets, which can happen in a divorce. So it's more about, yes, it's me in the relationship that's here, but there's also my parents want to help me with buying a house. But the conversation now becomes, what's the best way to do it that protects both the parents and the child that they want to assist. So that's one of the things I saw.
Yeah. So particularly the belief is more on how do we protect the wealth for the whole family. So they
Exactly.
believe that it's not just about giving out the money to, it's not about leaving a house to your kids.
Yeah.
It's about for how long will it stay in the family. That's what they're trying to protect.
Exactly, because parents, you have good intentions about, I want to benefit my kids. I want to pass on these things to them, this money, assets, houses, whatever it might be. But it's more just taking that up a step to say, well, okay, you want to do that, but what's the smartest way we can structure it to make sure that everything's protected in case something goes wrong, right? And so and the other thing I saw with these families is people understand the power of borrowing money. And I say this was one thing that really stuck out for me in my experience was in my job doing banking and finance, all our clients were doing was lending money, right? And so I remember thinking, I was like, well, back home, at least growing up as Africans, there's this idea in the community that debt is a bad thing. But I saw all these people doing these transactions for millions of dollars and they were just borrowing money. So I'm sitting there thinking, well, they didn't become successful in business because they didn't know what they were doing. So maybe there is a good side to borrowing money, and I wanted to understand how that works. So I remember I was sitting there, and when you're lawyers for the lenders and the banks, one thing that happens is like if you go to borrow money, you have to provide financial information to the bank, right? So we'd get to see people's bank statements and that kind of thing, and their financial statements. So I remember seeing this one couple, they were borrowing about $10 million and their bank account said cash in the bank, 14 million. And I asked myself, I said, well, they've got the money to do the whole transaction in cash, but they're still going to borrow. So there must be a reason why, because they didn't get 14 million in their account by not being smart. So then it made me realize, okay, maybe there is something there. And then you actually learn about how to use debt wisely and how it actually can grow your wealth and that kind of thing. So I think that was a big one that I really learned quite a lot about.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because there's the belief that debt is very bad. But then can you bring that perspective into a picture of a person who is living paycheck to paycheck, and they really want to build wealth, but they feel like they are not able to do it because essentially when you're building wealth, you'll need more money to fund whatever you're building. Is it possible for them to still build wealth in that case?
Yeah, because I think the more common example that we see with most people is, when they're going and buying a house. For example, if you decide to go and buy an investment property, you're going to borrow money to do it. But no one would really classify that as bad debt as such, because you're borrowing the money to get you an asset that can then make you more money, right? Now, there's a bit of a question around the home that you live in and whether that's, good debt or bad debt, because technically if you live in it, you're not making income, those kind of things. But generally, I find like investment properties are an easy example of where debt actually helps you to grow your wealth, right? Because what you find is it allows you to, you borrow some money, put some down on a house, then you actually get to control an asset that's worth a lot more. Get some people in there, they pay you rent, and it just slowly grows that way.
And I'm wondering, because if they're doing that, they must have a skill that they know. And one thing I tried to bring is, one is the mindset where you told me that they really know that they are protecting their wealth. Their mindset is on protection. And now we come to this place where they are using debt in a good way, because why the debt is termed as a bad thing is because of the consumer debt, and where when people use the debt in the wrong way, that's why everyone has that mindset that debt is really bad. And they have skills that have allowed them to know how to use that debt wisely. Would you give some ideas on the skills that they use, or do you?
I'd say the biggest one is information and being eager to learn. What I find is, and this is particularly important now where we live in a world where there's social media. And as soon as you go on social media, there's some person or some gurus who are trying to explain things, or, but what I found really helps is people who want to know and actually take steps to educate themselves. That's the most important thing, because you really want to go down to basics and just understand, okay, this is how, even when it comes to things like like for example, credit cards. I know that credit cards, generally you want to avoid them, but if you're going to end up using them, it's just like, how do you actually use them in the way that it doesn't get you, we call it the debt trap, right? Where you use it and then you can't pay it back. So it's just about understanding even those products, how do they actually work? So an example that I kept coming across was, if you go and get a credit card, there's that concept of interest-free period. Most people don't actually understand how that works, right? Because what somebody thinks is, if it says, let's say 40 days interest-free, it means that if I buy something today, I've got 40 days to pay it off without interest. But that's not actually how it works, because and I called the bank and I was trying to ask, because I was like, okay, I really want to know how this functions. So they're like, well, how it works is you have a billing cycle. So let's say your billing cycle is the first day of the month to the end of the month. So what that means is anything you spend money on during that time, you've got until, like, let's say the 10th of the following month is interest free, not 40 days from when you bought the item. So now that makes a big difference.
Yes.
Because if you buy something on the 25th of Jan and you think I've got 40 days to pay, by the time you pay, you've already got interest.
Yeah.
And then you're wondering, why is there interest? It's because you don't understand how it actually works. So I think even in those cases where, people are like, generally want to stay away from credit cards, but if you're going to be using some of these debt tools, at least understand and be keen to know how does it actually work so you don't get yourself in trouble. Because I find sometimes it's a matter of just knowing and having the information. So I find that's one of the most important things, is people who are keen to learn how it works and actually educate themselves. Yeah.
And is there a way that people can grow their wealth without getting into debt?
I would say it is possible. Generally, we just find it's a slower process, right? Because, for example, if you think about the concept of trying to buy a house without borrowing money, that's quite difficult, right? Because you're going to be saving for a long time.
Yep.
So where people, of course, it's always good. You should always get financial advice again, guys.
Yeah.
I'm not a financial advisor, that kind of thing. So I just speak based on what I know, right? But without borrowing, people have the other options of, like, saving and investing in shares, which I found is a good way to do it slowly over time, because that doesn't require you to spend a whole bunch of money up front, right? Because I know things like ComSec and all that, they make it quite easy to invest in shares and you don't need huge amounts. So I think when it comes to building wealth without borrowing, then you're looking at smaller ticket items like your share investments. Also, putting more money into your superannuation. That's another option that a lot of people go for.
Yep.
But if you're looking for your big items like houses, it'll be good if you can do it cash. But honestly, that'd be quite hard to get that much cash.
Yeah, true. Yeah. I think the only thing with the debt is getting into mindset of using the money that you don't have. I think that is why. Because what people might be doing is you go and get something on debt, and then it becomes a habit for you, and that's why maybe everyone knows that the debt is bad, but then there's the other side of the debt that most people don't talk about it, but we all in it. Most people are in it, because if you're in mortgage, that means you're in debt. You're in debt for that house, otherwise you'll be mortgage free. So
exactly,
and I think there is the positive side of the debt, as you said. I think you spoke about superannuation, and that is something that every Australian, if they are working, I think it is a requirement from the government despite whether you're in business or working, you're supposed to be putting money in super. Are you able to speak more about that?
So I think it's a good system, because it means that you're being forced to save for your retirement. I remember when I was growing up in New Zealand, the system in New Zealand was slightly different. If it hasn't changed, how it worked when I was there was you'd get to choose what your percentage is. So you could choose, like, whether you put 3%, 5%, 8%, whatever it is. But here I find it's good because Australia just says, nah, you have to put 12%, whatever it is at the moment, right? So I think it's good because it forces you to actually save for your retirement. Because what I found is that, and a lot of people were in this situation in New Zealand, is they would, put the minimum, so then they can spend the money being like, I'll save for retirement. Because what often happens with people is when you're in your 20s and 30s, you think retirement is this long way away concept. You're like, I'll sort it out later.
Yep.
But you really realize that, at least what I've been told, and the life advice I get, is that it comes around faster than you expect.
Yep.
But also, one thing you really lose the benefit of is compounding. So like if you start in your 20s, let's say you start when you're 25,
Mm.
and then you decide to continue contributing and putting aside money in your super until you're 65, you're a lot further along than someone who starts when they're 35 or 40, right? Because you've had that time, and that's contributed to it quite a lot. Yeah. So I think it's a good system that Australia has that forces people to save for their retirement. And then I think the most important thing about that is understanding yourself. Is you want to figure out what kind of retirement do I want to have? What is that going to require? And that'll tell you if you're on track with how much you're putting aside, or you need to put more aside. And of course, the financial advisors will help you do that and figure out, okay, if you want to retire like this, what does your saving and spending look like now, right? Because if you're one of the African parents who wants to retire back home, it might be a lot cheaper than someone who wants to retire and live here forever, or that kind of thing. Or if you're someone who is like, no, I just want to travel interstate once or twice a year, versus someone who says I want to go to a tropical island every year in retirement. So I think it's a very good tool. It forces you to actually save for retirement, which means you're providing for yourself in the future. But one thing I really think is important is to actually try and have a think about what sort of retirement am I wanting? Because then it tells you you're saving enough, you're contributing enough now, or you're not contributing enough and you need to do more. And the sooner you do that, the better, because then you can, if you do need to contribute more, for example, then you can do that quicker. Because what you don't want to do is just be like, I have to do 12% because the government says 12%. And then you just do that and then realize, oh, the numbers aren't actually where I need them to be. But by then it's a bit too late to try and sort out those things. So I think it's good to actually think about it as well.
And when we were speaking about this, I'm thinking about a woman I was speaking to, and I found it's not just her, but super is one overlooked tool by most people and most families. Why is it important for them to even check their super or know about their super?
Because you want to know what your balance is. And I've learned that there's this issue about unclaimed super, where sometimes people have different accounts and they don't know where their money is sitting. And so you might actually not realize that I've got money in other super accounts that I could get together. And why that's also important is also about fees as well. Because when you have your money in the superannuation funds, you'll pay certain fees for them to keep your super and invest it for you and stuff. And so what you also realize is if you've got different accounts, then you're paying different sets of fees. And that's eating into your super unnecessarily. It's avoidable, right? So it's good to actually keep track so you know how much you have and whether you're on track to the retirement that you are hoping for. Also, so that you don't pay unnecessary fees in terms of putting your money in too many accounts and paying management fees here, management fees there, that kind of thing. And also the other one is important is so you can actually figure out, who do I want to give my superannuation to when I pass away, which is a part of your estate planning. Because a lot of people may not know that, superannuation doesn't automatically just go into your will like other things. That's why you have the nominations that they do for your super. So you have to make sure that that's all in order. So you have to actually check and make sure that it's all, it's all in the...
The other time I was calling the super and I realized that you have to do the nomination yourself. I didn't know that. I thought that it was automatically going to the next of kin for my case, but they said you have to do a written document where you have to nominate a person. And let me just speak on that a little bit, because I was thinking of the self-managed super as well. And I know a lot of people use them for wealth building. Can you just speak a little bit on that and how it can help?
So the thing with self-managed super, right? And this topic comes up a lot, but it's... what concerns me about it is that it's one of those things that's become very popular, but a lot of people don't actually understand how it works and what responsibilities you have, right? So essentially what it is it's the government allowing people to take their money. So let's say, for example, when I arrived, I think I was using Australian super, right? So let's say you're using Australian super when you're working. So the government is saying, okay, you can take your money from Australian super and set up your own super fund, and then you manage the money yourself and invest it where you want. So at the moment, I think you can have up to 6 people, I believe, in the same self-managed super fund. So an example would be like if you've got parents and children who are all working and they decide to make one together. So now obviously there's advantages where, like, you get more choice over where your money goes, that kind of thing. And also if you're a family, for example, with 3, 4 working adults, then that means you guys put your money all in one place. And then instead of, mom and dad have their own account that's with this place and they're paying fees, then the kids have their own account with this place that's paying fees. You put it together, right? So it can help your costs become a little bit cheaper in terms of administration. But I think where it's gotten a lot of people into trouble is just doing it as part of the craze. Because, like, for example, there are a lot of people who are just using it to buy properties because they would realize, well, if I keep going to the bank and wanting to buy another property, they were sort of maxing out at, let's say, like 2 or 3 properties. And they're like, how do I get more of them? Open up the super fund and then I can buy another one. But even then, you still need to make sure that it's actually right for you, because it's not necessarily the right way for everyone, which is why when people ask me, like, I had someone who called me literally yesterday saying, hey, want to talk to you about setting up an SMSF. I was like, cool, here's a financial advisor, talk to him. And then I refer them to someone so then they can have that conversation and actually see whether it suits what you're doing. Because what's also happened is that the government has announced some changes they're bringing in for self-managed super as well around residential property and that kind of thing, right? So, so for people who are setting it up and thinking, oh, that's what I'm going to do, now the plan changes a little bit. Now, there are certain things I've seen. For example, I've got clients who, what they'll do is they'll set up their super fund, and then they'll buy like a business space and then lease it to their business. So like an example is I got a client who does logistics. So he bought a warehouse using a super, and then he runs his business from the warehouse. So there's things like that people have seen are pretty cool in terms of the benefits they can give you. But again, it just depends on what situation you're in, because even with the government changes they've announced recently, it shows you that you can't take it for granted that we can keep doing certain things. And I think the main thing is just to understand what the purpose of the self-managed super is, which is, it's still the same thing as when you're with the big funds, is to provide for your retirement. But what you find is people get in trouble because they just think I can use the money. So I remember, was it last year? I had one of the aunties call me and she says, Peter, so what if I take the money out and then I put it back? I'm like, you can't do that. You can't. So, and the government is very strict about the rules around self-managed super for good reason, because they don't want you doing something that then affects your retirement later. So they're very, very strict, saying, just because you have a self-managed super doesn't mean you can go and take your money out, that kind of thing. And they will punish people for doing that. So, when people do it, I'm like, look, don't access the app. Leave it. Just act as if it's not there, because you're not allowed to go spending the money. Or if you have a property, you other than the business thing, you can't go and live in it. Or even what's the examples they give? Like if you buy artwork or something, you can't put it in your house because it's supposed to be for retirement. So there's a lot of rules around it. So I think it's always good to get the right guidance as to how to actually do it.
Yeah, and just a disclaimer, this is just like for education purposes. Exactly. And if you think about what you're saying as we wrap up about the super, I feel like the same thing that you're speaking about, learn more, get the information, get the right information, and also see if it works for you. Because if you're investing on something that gives you 10%, still in the supers they still give you the kind of the same percentage if you think about it. So, and this one has the stress part of it, but it doesn't matter. Whichever person chooses, their choice essentially at the end of the day.
And like, it's always good to go with people who know what they're doing when they help you. Not all people out there who are encouraging you to do these things will necessarily know. Like I've dealt with one situation recently, and then I'm dealing with another one now, where the first one was basically the client had some people who set up their super. They didn't do it the right way. So then he had to engage me to basically go and organize and rechange things. Same one I'm dealing with for a couple at the moment. Person who set up their super did it the wrong way, and then now they have to get audited, right? So everything gets checked. And then so this issue came up. They're like, why is this set up this way? Because it's not correct. So now they have to pay me as the lawyer to go in and fix what was not done properly. So it's also a matter of just make sure that whoever you do get advice from and who helps you with these things actually knows what they're doing, because it can be expensive trying to fix those things later. And the other thing for super as well is there's the scheme that allows people to also save for their first home. That's another one that's always worth touching on, where basically if, like, let's say right now it's 12% for your super from work, you're allowed to contribute extra and then use some of that money towards buying your first home, which I think is a very cool feature as well of the super system. And of course, you get New Zealanders who can bring them a KiwiSaver. That's what we call super there. They can bring it over, and then they can also use it through that scheme to take it out to buy their first home. So there are a few cool things about the way they do it in Australia. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's such an amazing and enlightening conversation in regards to wealth and using some of the tools that government has already laid for us to help us in building our wealth. So I'm really appreciative for that session, and we'll just continue for the next session and the next wealth building strategies with Peter in the next episode.